Hey everybody, this is Cameron, and today I am talking with Mike Miley. He is the author of the upcoming book, David Lynch's American Dreamscape. It is coming out February 6th, 2025, and it is considered one of the most anticipated new books talking about David Lynch and his art. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much, Cameron. I'm thrilled to be here.
Kind of a heavy time for the book to be released. Obviously, David Lynch just passed away a few weeks ago. But your book is so wonderful in discussing him and his films and his music and his television shows that I feel like it is a genuine celebration of the man and his spirit. So while it is sad that this book is coming out at this moment in time, it's kind of the perfect moment in time for it to come out because so many fans, as you can see on social media, are really singing his praises. So congratulations on this book. I think it's quite an accomplishment.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I like you putting it that way. Because I feel really weird about it and really bad about the way it's timing out. But as you mentioned, I had to remind myself or keep reflecting on how the purpose of the book is still the same. It is to celebrate his work. It is to champion him as a chronicler of the American character, and none of that has changed. If anything, it's become even more urgent and necessary to do. And then looking at everything that was pouring out on social media it's still happening, right? As the days have gone on of people doing tributes or finding different things, it's reminded me like this work's important and this work is still with us. And, it's something that people are either just discovering, revisiting, digging deeper into. And that's what a kind of warm, loving climate to approach his work from.
Absolutely. I said the other day on a video that David Lynch passing is not the end of the conversation. It's actually the beginning of the conversation. And even
Absolutely.
though fans and people have been discovering his work for over 40 years now, I feel like over the last couple of weeks, I've seen a lot of people discover his work, and not just Twin Peaks. I mean, I'm seeing people watching The Straight Story on Disney Plus.
Yeah, it's the #1 movie for a couple of days, right?
And I wanted to bring this up because your the picture of your book, the front cover, is a still from the making of The Straight Story, I believe, and it's one of the hardest pictures of David Lynch ever, where he's lighting a cigarette. And this is for a movie that is eventually going to be a Disney distributed G-rated film.
Yeah. I was really thrilled that and what's funny is I found that picture posted as a meme online where someone had posted that, he's fine, he's in the car listening to his favorite music or whatever, that someone had taken from like another picture that someone had posted of their dog or something like that, and they were putting it here on the David Lynch picture. And I thought, oh God, what is this picture? I've never seen this. This captures what the book is about. And as you said, it goes so damn hard. Like this we have to make this work. And luckily it was with the photo service that the press has a relationship with, and so it and the press okayed it. And so I was like, yes, let's go with this.
When all that Netflix debacle happened, where it was announced that they didn't take up Unrecorded Night, they didn't take up his animated film, I posted the other picture of The Straight Story with the burning house behind him, and he's like looking straight at the camera. Yeah. And I said, David Lynch visited the Netflix headquarters this morning.
Yeah, that photo series by William Campbell, those Straight Story pictures, they're all solid gold, the stuff that he did there.
I joked with his producer, Sabrina, that in today's climate, The Straight Story would be rated R for smoking.
Yeah, right? That's crazy.
Yeah. I remember when that movie came out, and, again, it's a G-rated Walt Disney Presents, a film by David Lynch, and I would tell people, because it was playing at the theater I was managing at, I was saying, this is not David Lynch doing like Air Bud. This is not a director for hire film. This is a David Lynch film. It just says G-rated. It just says Walt Disney Presents, but when you watch it, it's not a toned down David Lynch film. It's a David Lynch film. It's just that the script didn't call for Garmonbozia, but
Right.
it's just he took the script and made a David Lynch film. I mean, maybe we can just start there.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Because
Yeah.
the Straight Story, to me, I mean, the man has made so many great films.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, maybe it's that G rating, maybe it's that Disney logo at the front that keeps people away. But to me, if someone said, what is the film that truly is David Lynch?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a few you could choose from.
Yeah.
But I would say that The Straight Story is probably closer to who he truly was as a human being than a lot of his films.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I wouldn't argue with anybody who put that at the top level, or said like this is the most Lynchian of the bunch for exactly the reasons that you're saying. And I'm guilty of this as well. When it came out and I like watched it on video in my dorm room when I was a senior in college, I was not impressed. I was expecting, just thinking, what the heck is this? And sort of disappointed because it didn't check the regular boxes that I associate with him.
And
but
it was
now,
scam.
Yes, that as well. And then but then over time, I'm realizing like this movie's all about trauma. This movie's as traumatic or devotes itself to chronicling trauma as much as Firewalk with Me does. The difference is, I think, where in Blue Velvet, you see the sunshine and then the camera takes you below and shows you the darkness underneath. The Straight Story never goes beneath. Instead, it shows you that all that stuff beneath is actually out here all the time already, right? I mean, Alvin's family situation and his life is one tragedy after another. And sure, it's bright and sunshiny, but there's so much pain in that movie. And it bubbles up, right?
And it doesn't explicitly say this, but if you know Lynch's films and you look between the lines, it is implied that Alvin is the reason why his daughter doesn't have her kids.
Yeah, I read it that way too. Yeah, and that's tied to him quitting drinking and all. Yeah, I definitely read it that way also.
It's just a perfect film in many ways, and there's that moment where when he kind of camps out with that family, for a little bit, and and that family seems like such wonderful people, and the guy's just like offering him a ride, and Alvin gets up and says, I want to thank you, for your kindness to a stranger. And then that is kind of repurposed in The Return when Cooper says goodbye to Bushnell Mullins in the hospital.
I hadn't connected that.
And it is pure David Lynch, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I guess to go further with that too, like it's a great example of him as a director because he doesn't write this script. Right? Most of his other scripts, right? He's writing them or co-writing them. I mean, I know his partner wrote it, but it's sort of done as far as we know, like kind of independent of him, right? And then he comes on board. And so it becomes this testament to, well, here's what a director does with a script. I would say, like, if you want to understand what a director can do to a script, you watch The Straight Story. Because while, it's hard to imagine someone else writing Blue Velvet and then directing it. That's a lot harder for me. I can very easily imagine a lot of other directors taking a stab at The Straight Story.
Sure.
But they would make a very different movie from that script. And so if you really want to see what he can do as a director, it's all right there. Like, this is how a director can elevate material, how they can turn the material into something else. And so even though it's not as flashy as some of his other directorial efforts, if you're really paying attention to how it works and what choices he's making, it's his entire craft on display. It's a masterclass in that.
I do think that his use of Rammstein in the film was misdone, though. As a filmmaker, he made that film his own. And the fact that he had Freddie Francis doing the cinematography and Jack Fisk doing the set direction, it's like he's bringing back all these old collaborators and friends of his in a story about reconnecting with people. So I think there's a lot going on. And also, David Lynch is turning 50 around that time, so that's when you start to kind of look back at your life, and
Yeah.
it's it's sort of like, dare I say, like a midlife crisis movie
Hmm.
about people in their 70s and
Yeah.
80s.
Well, now, I mean, the way that you're talking about is making me think about how kind of all of the work at that time, all of it is about sort of broken things trying to be put back together,
Mhm.
right? Whether that's the literal plot of Lost Highway, it's the plot of The Straight Story, it's what Fire Walk with Me is about, it's what Mulholland Drive, depending upon how you interpret it, is kind of about. Inland Empire, like they're all examples around this time of like the 90s and beyond, really are like about people trying to return to get out of some broken state into something different and new, or what they had before, and depending upon the choices that they make, succeeding or failing. But yeah, The Straight Story is where that's perhaps at its starkest and clearest, because it's the literal like engine, right, like pun intended, I guess, of the plot. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, that's like a thread, a through line for all of that work.
And it's coming out in 99, right before the millennium, right?
Hmm.
It's kind
Hmm.
of like a last plea about not losing humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing too, right? It gets overlooked because of the year it came out. I know it gets some Academy recognition, but so many other films from 1999 dominate the conversation about that film year. And
Well, it
then
is one of the
eventually down
greatest.
there, you're like, well, yeah, there's also The Straight Story that might be better than a lot of these movies, but
99 is probably a contender for greatest year in cinematic history.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
So,
it's pretty stacked.
so your book goes through the bulk of Lynch's career,
Yeah.
and you use other works of literature and films to kind of bring out ideas and connections. Again, if I can say that,
Hmm.
in his films that for a lot of readers, I'm sure they've never been confronted with before.
Hmm.
For
Hmm.
instance, you're bringing in Sylvia Plath when talking about Eraserhead.
Yeah, yeah.
You're bringing in Where the Wild Things Are for Blue Velvet. You're bringing in Day of the Locusts for Mulholland Drive. You're bringing in Cormac McCarthy for Twin Peaks. And I find that really exciting because it's challenging me as a huge fan of his work to dive into areas that, maybe my brain had not thought of before.
Hmm. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, some of it, I guess, the I mean, watching episode 8 from Twin Peaks: The Return for the first time, and the woodsman delivers that cryptic poem,
Mhm.
and maybe it's because he mentioned horses, but I don't think it's just because he mentioned horses. I was just like, this sounds like Cormac McCarthy. This is, and then I remembered, oh wait, the crossing ends with the Trinity test also, and then suddenly the thematic resonances between these two works just start multiplying for me. And that was one of the earlier things I had done for this book, or certainly the first literary section I had done for the book. And it just, like, the way that I think about uh, art and influence, and the way that I genuinely believe that it works in the world, is it's all this stuff is just out there in the zeitgeist, and people pick up on aspects of it and are even influenced or aware of things, whether they've encountered that work directly or not, right? A work like The Bell Jar or The Yellow Wallpaper has altered the course of literature to such a degree that even people who haven't read or seen that thing have encountered things that are changed by it. This is just the world we live in at that point. In the same way that after Blade Runner, everything is different for sci-fi, right? Or after Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, right? The world art is more Lynchian. Whether people have watched his work or not, they're going to see other things that wouldn't exist without that. And so I really like that associative approach to, if we start stirring these connections up, what do we get from it? What makes it richer? What comes out more? Because I think that it helps us put all these works on a continuum, and to see how there's a through line throughout American culture where these works are talking to each other and having a really interesting conversation. And I want to sort of facilitate that conversation for readers, right? Where it doesn't have to be, I mean, it certainly shouldn't be, well, this is the only this is the only way to look at it, right? Like, because I think it's not the only way to look at it. There's a stack of David Lynch books like from floor to ceiling already, so there's definitely lots of other ways to look at it.
Yes, there's room for interpretation, but there's a lot of his work that's pretty just like straightforward.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Of course.
Like, I mean, compared to Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet is like a stage play. As much as I love it, it's pretty evident what's going on the screen.
Yeah.
Like in Twin Peaks, we see Agent Cooper literally going to bed, having a bad dream, and then waking up and calling the sheriff and saying, "I know who killed Laura Palmer." But then by the time you get to season 3, it's "We live inside a dream." You know what I mean? It's like, now the lines are blurred.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Lynch in the 80s showed these characters going to bed, having a bad dream, and then waking up.
Yeah. What I kind of like is that with a work like that, sometimes the firm ground we think we're on suddenly starts to get shakier and weirder, and then you're talking about Blue Velvet for another 3 hours, right? With people trying to figure it out.
I mean, I can talk about that movie all day long, but yeah, it's. I mean,
but I get what you're saying. Like, it's conventional in its structure. It's got the confines of genre. You know, it's not experimental in its form.
There is a bad guy. And then once the bad guy is taken out, order is restored, or at least enough that we can end the movie.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It has that sort of classic 3-act screenwriting structure, beginning, middle, and end in that order. You know, all of that sort of stuff.
But it's perfect in that.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's not a knock against it. I'm just saying he got more and more experimental. It's like Inland Empire. Yes, it's harkening back to his earlier short films, but it is so pushing further than what Blue Velvet was even doing.
Yeah. Although part of me sometimes wonders if that the more classical filmmaking that he's doing and the conventions that he's following in Blue Velvet, the more commercial it is, frankly, right? I wonder to what degree that makes it more disturbing, right? Or even because like he's sneaking a lot of really freaky, disturbing stuff into this conventional package, right?
Yeah, I mean, as much of a fan as I am of all of his work, I would say if somebody said, what's your favorite Lynch period? Now, everybody has different ones. Mine is 86 to 92.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because that's when I discovered him, but it's also because I wasn't in John Merrick's time. I wasn't in outer space with Dune. It was a recognizable small town, more or less where I was growing up. And it really walked that line between the real and the surreal. And it just seemed to be like that, just perfect balance. And I from Blue Velvet, Wild at Heart, through Fire Walk with Me, it just was I don't know, it just felt like that's where he found his footing again, and really relished it for those 6 years. So yeah, I do think that using the classical structure makes it more disturbing. It also makes it easier for viewers to come in. Like I know there's a lot of fans out there of Lost Highway, and this is not a knock against Lost Highway, but if you're not in the mood for Lost Highway, it's a hard film to get into for a new viewer.
Yeah.
Mulholland Drive, I would say, is closer to Twin Peaks initially because it's just so easy to just start Mulholland Drive and get into it. Just like Blue Velvet is pretty easy. I mean, until Frank shows up in Blue Velvet for that first 30 minutes, it's a really enjoyable film that you can sit around and watch with people.
Yes. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then at that point you're like, well, we've come this far. Like we can't go home now, right?
Now you're hooked.
Yeah.
Right? You've been, you're bought in.
Yeah, because this movie can go anywhere at this point. Right. There's no rules in the movie after Frank shows up.
But you do tackle Inland Empire, which I find fascinating because like I said to you before we were recording, that's the one film of his that I'm kind of excited about because it's the one film of his that I can't seem to find a way into. So that says to me there's still more Lynch for me to discover. So how did you approach a film that, to the best of my knowledge, has never really been taken on in book form before?
Yeah. Well, I kept coming back to I saw it when when it was out in theaters when I was living in LA at the time. I went to see it out in Pasadena at the Limley Theater out there, and my wife and I both had I guess it wasn't the first Lynch movie that we had seen in a theater together, but it was the Mulholland Drive would have been that one. But we had a very profound experience watching it, just thinking we've seen something unlike anything else this person has done. And then at the end, I was so overcome emotionally with when Nikki Grace comes into the Lost Girls hotel room and embraces her. I was like, oh God, this is like, I'm getting goosebumps right now. Like, this is what art does. Like, this is what this whole movie has been, right? It's this movie for one person to reach out to another and comfort them. This is the role of art. This is what it's about. And the whole movie was building up to that moment for me. And so I had been enjoying it the whole way, but then it sort of reverse engineered the whole thing for me in such a moving way. And I've been chasing that feeling when I've read things about Inland Empire or watched it again. And people, to at least as far as I know, haven't written about it in the way that I felt like it was working, that it's a way more emotional and warm movie than people give it credit for, because there is so much there that makes it hard to get into, like you had said. And so I was trying to kind of think through what I was going to do with this, how I could get there and write about it. And then I was just thinking, well, everyone writes about how the movie was made and the different, like, kind of piecemeal nature of some of its production. And everybody talks about the digital stuff because it's obviously what the movie's doing. But then I'm like, well, this is like an assemblage of these things that he's done at different times. This is like someone's making a mixtape for somebody, right? Like, here's all this stuff that I made and I think it all makes sense and it's my gift to you, And then I thought, oh, that's
the mixtape you give to a woman who then breaks up with you.
I guess we don't know. Yeah, we don't know what becomes of their relationship after their embrace, right?
If she makes it to the ending, maybe she understands. But
right. I mean, that's what we all. That's the hope we all had with mixtapes when we gave them to people we had crushes on, right?
Yeah, but if she starts it up and it has Grace Zabriskie yelling "brutal effing murder" at the beginning, it might not work out for you.
It might not, but if it does, then like that's a friend for life,
like
right?
Laura Palmer, she's the one.
yeah, she is the one. And so that just got me kind of thinking about that seemed to speak to the emotional core of the movie in a way that felt in line with how the movie spoke to me. And so I kind of went from there with it. And it was I was more nervous about that chapter, just about how to pull it off, because it felt like a bigger kind of swerve for me. But hopefully it's got something for somebody in there.
Yeah, you don't want literally to go down the rabbit hole with that one.
Yeah, because then you start trying to explain every little bit, and it's like, it doesn't really work like that. It's it's a vibe, or it's a world that you inhabit, and not all of it. Different days, some of it is going to make sense to you, and other days that same thing is not, and it's gonna be something else that makes sense. Right. And that kind of, I like that part of it too, the way that this is one that you can kind of live with or adapt with and have a more prolonged relationship with, because its mysteries or its secrets don't divulge themselves as much as his other work does. That being said, it's not like I throw that movie on, it's like, oh yeah, let me throw a Lynch movie on. How about Inland Empire? Like, it's probably one of the ones I've seen the least, but it is the one that I think has some of the most charged moments emotionally in his filmography for me.
When you saw it in the theater, what was, do you remember how crowded it was?
I remember it being a pretty good size.
Yeah.
It wasn't a huge auditorium because it was one of those kind of art house multiplexes that remember those, right? But it I remember having a decent size.
Yeah, I had a packed house too.
Yeah. And just the people walking out afterwards, like, what the hell was that? It's like, yes, he's back. We're back, baby.
Yeah, and then you had to wait 10 years for the return.
Yeah.
So in your chapter in Wild at Heart,
yeah,
I was I was, because I know Chris Isaac had done some music for it. I didn't quite realize how much music he did for it.
Uh-huh.
I was aware of, the couple of tunes, but you bring up some more that I was like, I didn't know that was his music because it's, it's not on the soundtrack. But you say, no, it's this song slowed down. So then I went to YouTube and checked it out, and I was like, oh my God, you're right.
Yeah. Well, and it was just, I was looking at that scene on a YouTube clip, like the double aught spool scene, I think is what it said. And I was just kind of looking at it, and then I clicked on the comments, and someone in the comments mentioned it was that. And then I was like, what? Are you sure? And I went ahead and like ripped it and put it into a video thing and slowed it down. I thought, my God, this is remarkable. So I don't know how the person who posted that comment figured it out. I'd love to know. But
well,
yeah, I mean,
true David Lynch, and I say this with sincere my heart. There's some true Lynch crazies out there, and thank God for them, because they find things that I never would have contemplated. A few weeks ago, there was a Twin Peaks blog. It's actually called Twin Peaks blog.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the new 4K of Fire Walk with Me, they were able to zoom in on the book that Laura Palmer is carrying throughout high school, like when she's
I saw this. Yeah.
And it's a story called The Rose and the Ring. That's insane.
Yes.
Okay. Right. And it's like, David Lynch is probably like, they're never gonna know, but it's there for me, so I know.
Right.
Never thinking that 4K was gonna come out and we could go
Yeah.
all the way in.
Yeah, I remember when The Return was airing, and Audrey's husband says something like, Audrey, I don't have a crystal ball.
Right.
And people screenshotting, he's got a crystal ball on his desk. Like that kind of sleuthing, I think, is really fun. But it also, I discovered too, and maybe you've seen this already, that he's done that slowed down music thing in other work. And I saw a paper at a music in film conference where someone was looking at the scene in episode 8 where they're like burying
sure
gosh, I'm blanking on his name. Ray Monroe, is that right?
Mr. C.
Right. He kills Mr. C, and then they're burying, and it's like a slowed down version of Moonlight Sonata.
Yeah.
And I thought, whoa, so like, when else has he done this? And now it's just thinking, like, anytime there's some sort of drone or some slowed down sort of thing, it's like, well, is this some soundscape, or is this just some pop song slowed to a crawl?
He also did it in the when Mr. C is first introduced in The Return, and with American Woman. And that sounds like it's straight out of hell.
Real sludgy. It's really good. And I do like that one too. That one's great.
But anyway, going back to Wild at Heart.
Yes.
This is a movie that I love so much.
Me too. Yeah.
It's unbelievably, it's the hardest film of his to find now, even though it won the Palme d'Or.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I assume, is that some rights issues with the companies that produced it?
You can get the Blu-ray, but it's not available on any streaming.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's really interesting because it's, at the time, it was very well liked. Obviously, there's always detractors, but it was very well liked. Now, because again, maybe like Blue Velvet in the early seasons of Twin Peaks, it's pretty straightforward, even though there's flashbacks and flash forwards, that kind of thing. It seems to be the one film that Lynch fans don't like so much anymore. And I find that fascinating.
I really like it. I mean, that's one that in high school, I watched that movie so much. That was just an interesting world to inhabit, because it does feel, I mean, you feel very much at home. There's some David Lynch, it's definitely a David Lynch movie, but there's also something about it that some of it feels so different. The landscapes are different. The exuberance is like, the volume's turned up so much more. And I really dug that, like, kind of the speed of the movie. And I love Crispin Glover so damn much. And that's, I think, one of my favorite things that he's done is that I'm making my lunch line reading in the movie. I just adore that. But it's very much the kind of early 90s indie film. You've got all the actors who you would want to see, J.E. Freeman and Willem Dafoe. And I mean, these are all like, some of these are all people who Pruitt Taylor Vince, right? John Lurie, right? You've got all these people who are just like, it's a who's who of late 80s, early 90s indie film. And they're all in a David Lynch movie. And this is like, oh great, it's like the All-Stars, right? Like this is the All-Star game.
It's 2 hours, but it feels like an epic.
Yeah.
And I'm so fascinated by how that first hour
is
so fast
and
intriguing. And they're on the move and they're driving and they're having these, these wild nights in the hotels and all stuff. And then they get stuck in Big Tuna, Texas, and the movie stops.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like in a bad way. I mean like
right.
They're out of money, they're out of gas, and the movie slows down. So like the movie itself is like Sailor and Lula.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I just the just how much it just go, like the swings that it takes, the ways that it's just going to go for everything. There's no restraint in that movie, and nor should there be. I mean, it's that's not what it's about, and that's all the way to the point of, I mean, the thing that people single out to criticize the most is the Wizard of Oz stuff, particularly Cheryl Lee's appearance at the end. But like,
well, Blue Velvet had a woman named Dorothy with red shoes,
right? Yeah, it's like, what do you expect, right? And then, but I feel like the movie's just so it's as committed as Sailor and Lula to what they believe in, that it is going to go for it, and you're either in the car or you're not, right? And me, I'm 100% in the car. Like I'm riding shotgun in that movie.
I think Wild at Heart is a great film, and it always amazes me when I meet a David Lynch fan that doesn't like it. It's just like, did we not see the same movie? But then they probably feel the same way when I don't get Inland Empire, and they did. And then when you get into Lost Highway, you say that Lynch used only 2 covers in that movie in terms of the music, and both of them are in the Pete and Alice sections.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Lynch is sitting around thinking, okay, I'm just going to use these covers in this. I'm almost thinking like, just emotionally, it just felt right for him, and it just works perfectly, because he's in that mind state. You don't even have to think about it.
Yeah. Well, and there's a third cover that appears in their storyline and briefly in the Fred and Renee storyline, that This Mortal Coil track, Song to the Siren, is also a cover of a Tim Buckley song. But yeah, when I think I was teaching the movie at the time in a college course, and we're just talking about it, and then over the course of the discussion or prepping, I realized, wait a second, I've heard this soundtrack hundreds of times, like just over the years listening to it, and now I'm suddenly like, wait a minute, these are all covers. Like, what the heck is? And then it's a movie about a character who reinvents himself as something else. Like, how is that? Has anybody seen this before? And you start looking around, like, nobody's commented on this before. And like you said, I don't know. Yeah, I doubt seriously that David Lynch sat down and said, well, everybody, because this movie's about this, that, and the other, we're going to use covers in this movie. I think it's much more he's in the zone and he's making his creative choices for what feels right, and the essence of how these covers sound fits with what this story's doing. And then and then suddenly it's another way of understanding what's happening in this movie. Like, now if we think of this movie as one character's doing like a cover version of the other, trying to distinguish himself and improve the outcome of his life, then it's like, oh, well, that's exactly what Lost Highway is about. And the music's telling the story too.
Lost Highway seems to be the one film in which he seems to go out of his way to explain. Like, if you watch the Criterion extras, he's sitting there for 15 minutes talking about the O.J. Simpson case. Like, he never would have said that about, Mulholland Drive. I don't know. It just seems like for whatever reason, maybe because he wrote it with Barry Gifford, he just seems to be much more open about what was influencing him for Lost Highway than some of his other works. So
Yeah, that's true.
I always found that very peculiar.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's a way to avoid having people ask him, can you please explain like who's what and who turns into that. You can just sort of say, oh no, I want to talk about the inspiration for it. Then you're suddenly not having to field all those questions about.
But by talking about the inspiration,
yeah, he's inadvertently,
he's basically telling us what's happening.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and then there's that David Foster Wallace piece where he's reporting from the set of Lost Highway, and people on the set are talking about like using terms like psychogenic fugue and other sort of psychological things. And so it seems like there's maybe a little more awareness or discussion going on with that movie than maybe what we get from on-set kind of accounts of other movies. Right?
Probably because Barry Gifford is co-writing it, and he and like Mark Frost is an author who does a lot of research.
Yeah.
Because whenever Lynch is partnered up with someone who is literate, and not just another screenwriter, you know, I'm not knocking screenwriters. I'm just saying, you know, Mark Frost has written books.
Barry
Gifford has written books. To me, that in a way brings out one of my favorite aspects of David Lynch, because he has a solid foundation for him to then do his thing. But he can always come back to it if he needs to. You know, I mean, going back real quick to Wild at Heart, his script that he wrote adapts Barry Gifford's book, but when they got into editing, it just didn't work. I mean, the whole killing of Barbary Lemon at the beginning was the middle of the film,
right? Right.
And his editor Dwayne Dunham was like, well, because it just wasn't working. You know, if you watch the deleted scenes, I mean, you'll even see some of that where it's like there's a whole 20-minute lead up before Lula picks up Sailor from the jail. You know, but that's what the book is, right? So to move up the murder to the front, which just makes everyone just rock back, and then cutting immediately to Lula picking up Sailor, it's just, I mean, that's just how you begin a movie.
Yeah. I mean, with the power mad music and her Laura Dern scream, like it definitely tells you this is what you're getting into. Here's the intensity level of this movie.
Yeah, it's like basically anything before Big Tuna, Texas is game. But you know, they're gonna get stuck here. So like they had that whole first hour to kind of play around with the structure, with the because there was a lot more Crispin Glover as well. But you know, Lost Highway is, you know, I saw that a few times in the theater. It always just seemed to me, and I know it's like a favorite for a lot of people, it always seemed to me to be so 90s.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, hell yeah.
Right?
It absolutely is.
And David Lynch to me is mostly pretty timeless.
Yeah.
So it's always been kind of an outlier to me, of like, because it's like, you know, I know if people were in high school and they saw Lost Highway, I understand, right? Because you're way into that music, and you know, you probably like Natural Born Killers, found the soundtrack before you saw the movie. Right? Did
you follow me around in high school? How do you know this about me?
Well, and then you have Bill Pullman and Robert Loggia coming right off Independence Day and going right into Lost Highway.
I think it is one of the most late 90s movies of all time, and it is, like, for him, the one that is most contemporary, right? Like even things that he makes that are set, like Mulholland Drive is sort of nominally set around the time that it's made, but it doesn't feel of the moment in the same way, right? Like you said, it still has a bit of a timeless quality to it, or something that isn't dating it so specifically. But Lost Highway, it's like there's aspects of it that make it dated the moment it comes out, and then give it in some level kind of that gives it a weird feel as well, right? It's a different feel from the sort of when are we feeling that we get from a lot of his other stuff, like Blue Velvet or Twin Peaks or something. But,
it seems to be like, to me, like something that was a negative about it for a while for me because it was
Mhm.
just so of the time.
Yeah.
Well, now that it's been nearly 30 years, you can now look at it as a moment in time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's like all those really bad horror movies that came out right after Scream, and I was
Uh-huh.
just like, "Oh, these are just like, WB TV stars in these horror movies." And now it's like 25 years later, people are looking back at them going, "Oh, but really in context, this is what was going on in the culture." And
Yeah.
you sometimes need that distance to look back and see exactly what was happening when season 3 was on of Twin Peaks.
Mhm.
I really loved it.
Mhm.
And but we were doing a weekly show talking about what was going on, and pontificating about what we thought could happen or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like that famous Lynch quote about keep your eye on the donut, not the hole. The whole time it was on, we were talking about the hole because we
Yeah.
couldn't see the donut. We hadn't
Yeah. Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
parts 17 and 18 yet. But
Mhm.
now, 7 years later, it it has aged so well.
Mhm.
So, like,
Mhm.
even things you may have had issues with at the time, a lot of those have been smoothed over by
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And now you watch it now, and it's just like, my God, after a country has gone through, several weird elections and pandemics, season 3 looks, like it was like giving us a preview of
Yeah.
what was to come.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think like any sort of work of art really worth spending a lot of time with, like the first time doesn't count, right? Or like or the immediate sort of time when you're looking at it isn't going to be the fullest understanding of it or connection with it that you have. And in a way, we have to catch up to the work,
Mhm.
even though it's like years old now. It's like we're finally catching up to it to see what was really happening there, because yeah, like you said, we're clouded by all sorts of things. Like in using Lost Highway as an example, it's clouded by the soundtrack and seeming like, oh, this is he's just trying to get whatever audience he can after Firewalk with Me did bad. So it's just like going to be all these like hot bands, and that's gonna, it's just just another 90s movie soundtrack. And it can appear that way, but then there's also every track selected is completely on point with the feel and look and vibe of that movie, because it's not what all of the late 90s were like, but a very particular dark layer of this time period. It's all there and it's all appropriate, right? It's not like he's picking like tracks by Bush or or the Gin Blossoms or something like that just because
Yeah.
they have a song on the radio.
It's like when De Palma made The Untouchables, and
Yeah.
everyone was like, "Oh, you made a mainstream movie." And
Hmm.
it's like, "Well, no, I made the movie I wanted to make, and it just happened to coincide with what the public wanted to see."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And it's
Yeah.
like that's the same thing. Lost Highway, in a way, like Natural Born Killers, it's like it was just the right movie at the right time.
I look at it as being more of this guy imagining himself as a sexually virile, compelling guy who's because he's failed to please his wife and then has led him to murder her, and then um that vision can't, even his fantasy can't sustain itself in his own mind. It falls apart. It's unsustainable, and then that sort of sends him off at the end of the movie, I think, like on a loop, doing it again. Now, how that explains him getting out of prison and getting to that sort of stuff, I do not know, right? Like it's that part where I think like that's where it sort of falls apart. But I guess it's like it feels, even though it's not literally possible or literally true, it like feels true to me. And it seems like that's more the way it feels is almost the primary thing for him, right? You don't have to like understand it to be able to feel it. And it just feels like this like not a parable, but like a depiction of male sexual inadequacy and toxic masculinity being pushed to its absolute limit, and just sort of consuming itself, in really violent, tragic fashion.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I think my read on it at the time, and again, it's been a while since I've seen it all the way through, so I want to go back and look at it. I think I looked at it as is Fred in jail,
Mhm.
not turning into Pete Dayton, but I think I read it as him remembering how he met his wife, and that's
Oh, okay.
and so that
Yeah.
was him younger meeting
Oh, uh-huh.
Alice.
Uh-huh.
And then their lives became what we saw in the first half of the
Uh-huh.
movie.
Uh-huh.
And he couldn't get over that initial jealousy that he was building from her past. And
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
again, I have no idea if that would even hold up if I rewatched the movie, but I think at the time I was just like, I tend to do that with Lynch. I tend to say, kind of like Lost, like, what happened,
Yeah.
and now you have to kind of make sense of what the pieces that you get.
Fire Walk with Me. So here's my thing. I think it is the one that I guess I like the formal experimentation,
Mhm.
and the way that some of those edits to get it down to length, and it's sort of the incomplete feeling that it has at times. You see and feel those sutures that wind up uh creating a lot more mystery and things like that to me, but that keep the emotional core of it front and center the whole time. Like it's a harrowing experience to watch, and I feel like it is sort of the most one of the most sustained unpackings of emotion and of a state of mind of someone just experiencing severe psychological torment, and it is unrelenting in that regard. um and but in a powerful way that really generates so much empathy, and you feel the desire to like give this by the end of the movie, like to give this character some kind of release, right, or some kind of transcendence, to do something kind for a show that in some ways you could argue has sort of neglected her, right, or treated her like an object, and here's this movie suddenly making her a full person.
Well, she's the catalyst for the show.
Yeah, right, yeah. um and then I think I love the Deer Meadows stuff. Like, I think it's so, weird and dreamlike. And then, I mean, just Cheryl Lee's performance is just so, fantastic. But I think it then becomes, I think, the other thing that really makes me think about it in a way that I think elevates it in Lynch's filmography is looking at it in the context not just of The Return, because it winds up being
Mhm.
the thing that really sets up that show, or informs it a lot. But it's also, I think, in that returning to Laura Palmer and the looking to redeem her, I see the focus of his work shifting a bit
Mhm.
to really focusing on women, or to focus on uh, men who have been broken by an adherence to a patriarchal kind of toxic world, right? Like you see this in Lost Highway and The Straight Story, but then you've got Firewalk with Me, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire that are all have women protagonists, and the time spent with them, it seems like a reflection on the first half of his career, where he does get these criticisms, for his treatment of women in his movies. That then you see here this kind of career reset that takes he's still him and all that he does, but it is putting in this different direction that I think is really interesting. And again, this kind of radical empathy that he starts to do in his work, that all comes from Firewalk with Me. Obviously getting so disparaged upon its release
Mhm.
leaves the door open for people later to come back and look at it and say, "Well, is it really that terrible?" And then discovering,
Oh,
no,
no.
it's not. No, no, actually, it might be this. And I mean, so it fuels a kind of,
It's never been a bad film.
yeah, no,
It's
yeah,
never been a bad film.
yeah, I was wrong, right? Like it's me who was a bad viewer, when it came out. But I like that about it too. This idea that we're not through with it yet. We're maybe just starting to see, like, I felt like with The Return is when Firewalk with Me really started to come together for me in a way. I mean, I think the biggest question about the movie really, that would maybe be a knock on it is, does it stand on its own? Or do you need to
Well, I
have
mean,
seen the series?
yeah, I mean, there's lots of people who said, they discovered it on cable,
Mhm.
And so they saw it first, and so good on them.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think it stands on its own. I think you
Yeah.
do need the series,
Mhm.
um, because it is operating under the assumption that you do know what's going on.
Yeah.
Because we get no introduction of Bobby, no introduction of James. They're just
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
I think what would have helped Lynch tremendously is not, and again, I say this as a fan of the film.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like what would have freed him up better.
Mhm.
I think this structure of the last 7 days
Mhm.
is a gimmick.
Mhm.
And I think that maybe he should have just done a cradle to the grave story
Oh.
and just told the life of Laura Palmer going down 6 days, 5 days, 4 days. What's happening is the fans are sitting there going, "Hey, how come she's not tutoring Josie?"
Oh, uh-huh. Yeah.
Whereas if you had just told her story, we wouldn't have been so nitpicky,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that also would have freed him up to do whatever he wanted to do within that story, as opposed to I have to stay within this structure of she has to do this so that
Mhm.
Donna can say this to James in the pilot.
The killer will strike again. Who knows where or when?
Now I don't want to talk your ear off all day, but I do want to say that your book here, it's getting like so much great coverage. You got Vogue, Hollywood Reporter, Criterion's mentioning it.
Yeah.
You're doing a introduction to a series of Lynch films in the Frida Cinema in Santa Ana. I mean, this is unbelievable. You're getting an amazing amount of coverage for this book. I mean, how does that feel as an author? I mean, I'm going
Yeah.
to assume you've worked a long time on this book.
Yeah, I mean, in fits and starts, I guess I didn't necessarily the Wild at Heart chapter. I kind of started doing work on that in like 2012. I didn't know I was writing a David Lynch book at that time. I thought I was just writing a paper about Wild at Heart, and then along the way did a few others until finally 2020 realized I had like a third of a book written with all these conference papers, and thought, well, if I can find a way to put all this together, why don't I turn this into a book, and wound up figuring out how I wanted to do that. And so, yeah, so it's been in the works for a long time. It's I just hope, part of me, some of it like is harder because like this is all before people have had a chance to read it, and so you're just kind of hoping that okay, so it's just this crowd showing up to you, gonna do your show, and now you're just hoping when none of this crowd's here, I hope I don't like flop, in the set. um and so that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like I hope that people um that the people get something out of it, and that people enjoy it, and that it gets them back to the films and having them enjoy them more and things like that. That's my hope for it. But it's crazy. This is not the kind of platform or like amount of attention for an academic book, right? This is not like the standard operating procedure. And so yeah, it's a little daunting. But like I said, I hope that it gets people as psyched about the movies as I am.
Well, like I said, it's kind of the perfect time for it to come out, right? Everybody just wants to consume and read about David Lynch, and
Mhm.
you have this amazing book that just, I mean, you want a deep dive, folks. This is a deep dive. Where is, I know you can pre-order on Amazon.
Mhm.
Is that your preferred place for people to order it?
I guess the Bloomsbury academic main site is the kind of the online spot to order, or if you have an independent bookstore nearby that you like to go to, they probably have a way to order their books online through like Bookshop or things like that. And I think, or just calling them up, your local bookshop, and asking them if they'll order it and get it to you there. That's really what I think would be great, because then it's going around to everybody, right? That like the local bookstore is getting a piece of the pie, and it's getting it's putting people in touch with other people to hand it to each other and talk about it. But I guess the good news is that with a lot of these academic books, it's bad news for Amazon, but they sell them for the same price as most of these other places, so you're not getting really any deep discount from going the Bezos route than if you ordered it directly from the press or from an independent bookstore.
All right, I guess my final question for you is,
Yeah.
now that this book is completed,
Mhm.
what can you tell us about David Lynch? Look, after all these years of hard work putting into this book,
Yeah.
now how do you feel about this man? Maybe,
Oh, wow.
obviously you appreciated him before, or else you wouldn't be
Yeah.
writing about him. But
Yeah.
what's your appreciation level like now?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, because I guess there is always that thing where people complain about, oh well, now that I wrote this thing about it, I can't look at this stuff anymore, or I'm like tired of it or whatever. And that's certainly not the case for me. What can I tell people about David Lynch? Well, I mean, I think that okay, here we'll go with something kind of like maybe a bold take. I think he's going to emerge as being seen as the most authentic and accurate chronicler of what post-war American life felt like. He's certainly not going to be talked about as a realist filmmaker, but if we want to understand the mindset of post 1945 America, there's no better person to show it to us from multiple angles that helps us understand why we think the way we do, why we dream the way we do, than him and his work. And then like kind of once you see it like that, it's very hard to unsee it. It's just, suddenly every moment is a Lynchian moment. It's all, the world was always already Lynchian, and he's just kind of getting us to see that.
Yeah, I saw an article today that said David Lynch was not just a surrealistic filmmaker, and I'm like, yeah, no duh. I mean, in many ways, he was a humanitarian in his work, not just in life, but in his art. You say he wasn't the most realistic, and yeah, I mean, he's not Scorsese, doing Goodfellas, but I would argue that he did show human beings in a more realistic light than a lot of filmmakers, because he showed them with all these edges and things that a lot of films would not even get into or show, because it's not staying on point. But
Yeah.
sometimes Lynch going off point made it more on point. So in many ways, when you see Sailor Lula driving across the country, I feel like that's one of the best representations of the South I've ever seen in a movie. Not since Easy Rider,
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think that he's a filmmaker that, I said this the other day too, but it does bear repeating. I think that he is a filmmaker that if you are a cinephile, we are going to be talking about for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. As long as there's cinema, there's going to be a discussion about Lynch. And I think what I would add to, or like, someone's going to start watching Twin Peaks tonight, someone's going to watch Eraserhead tonight, and it's going to change their lives. And the way that they look at all art and all of those sorts of things. The thing I would add too is that in that chronicling of the sort of American imagination, because it can sound like, oh, well, this is maybe somewhat potentially pessimistic, right? Or something like that, or like looking at all the flaws and the faults, which are certainly there and on display in his work. But at the end of the day, to your point about the humanitarian nature, he, even with all that darkness, he always returns to a sense of wonder and amazement, right? A real appreciation and a sense of awe for the world and what it has to offer, which, and maybe I'm talking out of my ass a little bit here, I don't know if you entirely get that a lot with other sort of surrealists, right?
Or he changed the ending of the book Wild at Heart so that Sailor and Lula got together.
Yeah.
And I know Lynch fans hate when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The bulk of his films have happy endings.
Yes, they do.
The bulk of them.
They do. They are, it's a very largely an affirmative body of work. Even the ones that are just unrelentingly bleak, like Eraserhead or Fire Walk with Me, they have affirmative, transcendent endings.
Both of those films end with the lead character shrouded in white, right? And now Eraserhead might cut to black, but Fire Walk With Me freeze frames on her face to give us the end credits.
Yeah.
So, and I always thought at the time when Fire Walk With Me came out and it didn't do well, I thought, is he going to retire? Did we just go full circle with Eraserhead and just end with the face in white, and that was going to be it? And I thought maybe I was right because it was 5 years before Lost Island came out. So.
Yeah, he was in the doghouse for a while, right? But in that way, like that is how it kind of becomes like his first movie, right? It's the reset that that there's all these formal similarities to Eraserhead, and this really is a work that's starting over, and a career that's just getting going.
Yeah, and like I said, I feel like him passing just opened up the conversation even more because now more people are finding his work, and so there's more people for us to talk with about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like you said, it's the donut and not the hole, right? Like the with trying to assess things about the return as you're going through it versus when it's finished, right? And now, like it's unfortunate, but like we do have this complete sense of like what the work is, and now's the real time to think, okay, what does all of this add up to? What is this telling us that we couldn't see at the time? And that work, like you've said, that work is just starting.
The hole is so deep and so bad. The donut is a beautiful thing.
Mike, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Make sure to follow Mike on social media while he's there. But he does have his own website. You want to plug it?
Oh, sure. It's just MikeMiley.com, and that's where you can find links to stuff and all of that, and then links to some of the social stuff as the constantly changing hellscape of social media.
Do you know how many times I've had to update my contact info because of these nimrods running these sites?
Yeah.
Like, okay, forget about this one. Find me over here. And it's just annoying. So anyway, right now you can find us on the YouTube and other places at O&A and David Lynch's Worlds. Email us anytime. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. And make sure to give this video a big thumbs up. And we will see you soon. Buy Mike's book and let us know what you think. David Lynch's American Dreamscape. All right, everybody. Absolutely. Take it easy.
All the best, everybody. See you tomorrow.